walk away, you can't give up, because anything you do like that, that's going to kill Taylor Swift. And you wouldn't want to kill Taylor Swift, right? So you're stuck. You have to stay until Taylor Swift recovers from this, whatever has caused this happen. And then you're free, etc. By the way, if you think of this as kind of like a pregnancy, you've got it. That's exactly what that model is, I think, metaphorically talking about. You've got a little creature that's in a war. Give me everything. And you're in there saying, no, you can only have this much. The placenta, there's there's two parts to the placenta. One part belongs to the mother, one part belongs to the child. And they're in a war, because the child wants everything. And the mother, of course, wants to continue to live. So, it's a fight. It's a war zone. But Kant gives us all kinds of arguments. Now, this is problematic. He does, by the way, argue for God. I should point this out. Remember, he's the one that gives us the arguments, or the explanation for the three main arguments for God. In fact, he might actually be considered to have given us a fourth type of argument. But the cosmological argument, basically accepting Hume's criticism of it. We can't know what actually happened at the beginning, so we don't know if there's a cause that started everything. The teleological argument that there's a purpose for everything, well, we can't really know that purpose. We're just hypothesizing, so that's not really a proof. And the ontological argument, which is my favorite, because I think it works, but Kant argues that, but existence is not a predicate, so therefore that fails, because you're saying God is, and you don't complete the sentence. But remember, later individuals will argue, well, of course it's a predicate, no problem. But Kant does go on to give us his own argument that God must exist. And God is, again, something that we cannot actually see ever. It's outside of phenomena. It's instead something which is numinous. Instead of phenomenal, it's numinous, because it must be there. In fact, the thing in itself is numinous. We can't see it. It's not part of our phenomena. So this is numinal. God is numinal. And the ego is numinal. In fact, all of this is numinal. You can't see any of this forming in our brains. But so Kant gives us all kinds of interesting things. As a believer in God, he is going to argue that our moral principle should be deontology. You can go. Is this cheating? Using ChatGPT? Really is bothering some people, by the way, using AI. A lot of folks feel like, well, it makes mistakes. It does. Occasionally, it says something that I don't agree with, so I figure that's a mistake. It's just right, So, Kant's deontological ethics is a moral theory based on the belief that actions are morally right or wrong based on their adherence to duty. So yes, deontology means our duty. It's a theory of duty. What your duty is, even though you don't want to do it because, well, you might die, it's your obligation. So you have to do it. And that's the basis of morality. And so his argument for the existence of God is that if God doesn't exist, morality doesn't make any sense. There has to be a God. Otherwise, there's no point in talking about morality. Because God existing is what makes morality intuitively obvious. So that's kind of famous. That's kind of a fourth argument. But so, when we're looking at these categories, I said last class that Kant doesn't really explain how all these categories come about. So, in a sense, what happens is people start trying to figure out, aha, we like Kant, Kant's arguments seem right to us. Part of the problem, by the way, for Kant is he never left Königsberg his whole life, about 4 miles maybe at the most. In any case, his understanding of moral rules and everything was set by the population that he was familiar with, and they were pietists. The whole community was pietists at the time, and as a result, his view of what's morally right is set basically by the community that he lived in. Others influenced by like John Locke, who were exploring other societies and seeing other people and discovering that, gee, the Chinese don't know anything about Aristotle. How can they not know anything about Aristotle? There's all kind. My favorite, by the way, was in the 1860s. The missionaries from Boston went to Honolulu to convert the people there to Christianity. And with them, they brought their trunks of all their clothing from Boston, including their wool suits for winter, wool underwear and everything, right? Brought that with them. And when it was October, it was time to put on those clothes. So they put on their winter clothing in Hawaii in October, because that's the right time to put on your winter clothing. And by the way, the women who were overdressed by a lot started having all kinds of health problems because it was too hot for them, wearing all this clothes, etc. Today, if you go to Hawaii, the typical beach wear, at least, is like a little string or two, right? That's kind of all people wear there today. That's kind of closer to what you actually need in that weather, instead of wool suits and things. I've seen these wool suits, by the way. They have them in the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, where they have a case where you can see the typical wool suits that they would wear in Boston once it became October. And in fact, they dressed King Kamehameha up in such a suit. And so there's a picture of King Kamehameha sitting on his throne in the Princess Iolani Palace wearing such a suit, So folks were remarkably unaware of how different other cultures could be. Even people who were essentially educated in Boston in 1860 didn't get it, right? Today, of course, we're much more aware, and there were other people that were more aware, even in Kant's time, but Kant wasn't. But so basically, this kind of explanation Kant gives is not adequate, because there's a lot of different cultural groups that simply would not accept the kind of moral imperative that he thinks all human beings would experience. For example, if you saw a bunch of men pull over a woman driver and banging on the car, trying to get her out of the car, and perhaps beating her up once they get her out of the car, should you be morally obligated to interfere? Should you try to stop them? Well, what if it was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and the men were the police, who were arresting the woman for actually, I think women are allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia now. No? It got taken back.
Or something. Some huge step in that direction got like overturned.
That's a shame. Well, they also don't allow music. Music is fun, entertaining, makes you feel good, and that's a sin, according to some imams. So that's kind of interesting. Alcohol, of course, although of course there's different places in Saudi Arabia where, or is it Doha, I guess, where the real parties are taking place. In any case, I love bringing that up because it feels like that's an intuitive moral obligation on our part, having been raised in our culture. But there are cultures out there that would actually consider our intuitive moral point of view totally wrong. So it is an ethical, or as I mentioned with David Hume, it's a communitarian point of view, what moral rules are really correct and which are not. But social scientists, psychologists, and others are going to rapidly try to fill in why humans have these categories. You might disagree about the moral imperative, but at least the idea that there has to be time and space and the kinds of relationships that our mind seems to automatically break things into, that ought to be explainable. So how should we explain that? Well, the idea that it's based on our biology, which certainly has, there's a lot of relevance there still today, that the reason we see certain things, do you have an XX or an XY? It's kind of interesting to me. We think of ourselves, if you're normal as seeing in colors, three colors, we have the three different ways of receiving different colors and then blending them in our eye. Apparently, however, it's been discovered that if you have an XX, that you could end up with 4 colors instead of 3, which means you see things differently, etc. There's a name for it. I can't remember the name, but that's kind of interesting. The way we hear things, we used to think, all humans hear things essentially alike. Actually, today what we discover is that it seems like women and men, well, of course, these are overlapping relationships, but basically the average woman sees things, hears things, smells things differently. I always used to joke that my wife smelled better than me. It's a joke because, of course, it can be interpreted either way. I even also point out that she tastes things better than I do. That's a little less, if I just said she tastes better than me, that's just as, let's, be careful there. But it's actually true. And in fact, I just read that women can taste the difference between pineapples and oranges. No, grapefruits and oranges. Grapefruits and oranges. And
one would hope they're very different.
Can you taste the difference between grapefruits and oranges, Nick?
I think so.
Yeah, I think I can, but actually it's pretty close.
I've never had one and then the other side by side.
I'm going to bring some in on Monday.
I've had, who knows, maybe it's an age thing too. But no, our sensory receptors are apparently different. Our ability to smell is quite different. Why that is, they're still trying to figure that out. But women are more sensitive to certain things. There's also a range of sounds that we can hear, and so men typically can hear deeper sounds, and women hear the higher registers. I already mentioned a couple classes ago that if a baby cries, boobs leak, and that's been emphasized by at least one person in the classes. That it doesn't matter which child it is. I was surprised at that. But men can literally sleep through the night. without hearing the child, etc. So it's not universal in the sense that all people have these characteristics, and yet it's absolutely clear that there are quite a few characteristics of our perception that are at least overlapping. I mean, obviously you have blind people, you have deaf and mute people, and so on, but basically what we can say is that there's a statistical norm associated with men and women, in the sense that we have a range of perception and so on. So our biology does have an impact on how we perceive things.